Hi, what can I do for you?
Hi, this is my grandpa. He's traveled all around the globe and lived in exotic cities throughout his many adventures. Today, I'm on the way to go visit him so I can capture some of his amazing stories to share them with you. But for now, I'll let him introduce himself.
My name is Rotui Kellum, and I moved here with my wife and family in 1975 from Arizona, where I retired from the Air Force and worked for Sawyer Aviation. My purpose in coming to New York was to be hired by the FAA. And this house is filled with memorabilia of places I've lived, such as Tahiti, where I was raised, Hawaii, where I went to boarding school, evacuated to California when World War II started. Years later, finished school in New Mexico, and then traveled to Europe, where I met my family for the summer. When I came back from Europe, I joined the Air Force and went to Korea, and afterwards was transferred to Vermont and met my wife and started a family. The Air Force continued my travels to Europe, Thailand, and then Arizona, and spent the last 46 years in New York. And if you'll excuse me, I'm expecting company. Stand by.
Hi, Papa.
Oh, hi, Matthew.
Hello. You ready?
Yeah.
All right.
How about on the count of three, we'll say fromage. One, two,
three. Fromage!
I arrived at Shaw Air Force Base in late 65. At the time, I was a major in the Air Force, and my family were living on base, and we had my wife and three sons. And my assignment at Shaw Air Force Base was wing personal equipment officer, and what I was doing was responsible for helping support the squadron of RF-4 pilots that were being sent to Vietnam. That was what I was doing, and in order to get my flying time, I was flying a RB-66, which is a photo reconnaissance version of the B-66. And during that time, on weekends, I would take a cross country, and I would fly Puerto Rico, or I would fly to Bermuda, and then one time I flew up to Connecticut and took pictures of Groton, the submarine base, where my wife's sister was married to a submariner. It worked out later on when I went to Vietnam that my family was stationed in Mystic, Connecticut, not far from where my sister-in-law was living with her husband in the Navy there. While I was there, my good friend Smiley Pomeroy was there also. We went through pilot training, B-66 training together. We were assigned to England together in the same squadron, the 30th Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, and we were there for about a year and a half in England, and then we transferred together to a photo reconnaissance squadron in France at Toul-Rosier Air Base, and we rejoined again at Shaw, and we discussed what we wanted to do about the war, and so we both volunteered for RB-66Cs, which was the ECM version of the B-66, which was based out of Thailand, in Takhli Air Base in Thailand, and we volunteered to go over and fly a combat tour there. And so I was only at Shaw for a few months before I was transferred to Thailand. I went commercial. I went with Pan American Airlines. I reported into a military base, and they had civilian airliners come into the military base and take us over to Vietnam. We stopped in Honolulu on the way, and got to see my sister, who was there, and then from Honolulu went to Vietnam, and I landed at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and then refueled, and then they took me from Tan Son Nhut, Vietnam, to Bangkok, Thailand. before I reported into my base at Takhli, I spent several days in Bangkok. And Bangkok is a very interesting city. It's a beautiful city. It's sort of exotic. They have many temples with peaked roofs, and the temples were interesting because there were a lot of how they were put together. They're very exotic looking and very well decorated and so forth like that, and a lot of interesting things to see in Thailand. I did the tourist things. One of the women there just won a Miss Universe contest, a Thai woman. And so we went to see Thai dancing. I was with a group of people that were going to Takhli. And so it was interesting in costume. And also taking the river trip. And they open markets with the little boats and with all the vegetables and food and other things on. So it was very interesting on that, and they had the way these boats were powered with automobile engines, but a long shaft, and it was like almost like an outboard motor, but the shaft was very long, and it wasn't deep. It was just way behind the boat. We did that, and then eventually we had to give up Bangkok and go on the bus and take us up to Takhli, which was in central Thailand. I was put into the B-66 ECM squadron. It was the 41st Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, and when we arrived in January of 1966, the squadron had just been activated recently, and so we were all new. We're starting from scratch almost, as far as an organization was concerned. While we were in Takhli Air Force Base, the base was shared. It was primarily the F-105. It was a Thai air base, and they had F-86s and transports and so forth like that. But the Thai Air Force was not flying combat missions into North Vietnam or anywhere. They were there for their own purposes, and they shared the base with us. But the greatest number of aircraft on the base were F-105s, was the fighters. And then our group was relatively small, maybe 12 or 20 B-66s. And then we had tankers. The Air Force had some tankers there, the KC-135s. They may have maybe 6 or 8 airplanes there. So we shared the base, and when a mission went off, most of the time we were supporting fighters from Takhli Air Base because there were so many of them there. But occasionally we would support fighters from other bases that were also targeting up in North Vietnam. My first missions were flown as reconnaissance, where we'd fly around North Vietnam, and we were trying to triangulate, find out where the missile sites were located, where the radar sites were located, and where the anti-aircraft guns were located, and any other things like that. And that was the reconnaissance thing. Then we had strike support, where we would go in with the fighters into the target area. Our purpose in going in with them was to protect them by jamming enemy radars, missile sites, anti-aircraft, and so forth like that. Then we would orbit near where their targets were, but just slightly out of range of the missile sites, so that we wouldn't get shot down while we were trying to support them. So we were something like maybe 20 to 25 miles away from a known missile site. And we also had fighter cover for the B-66s. We had 4 fighters just turning around behind us, looking for enemy aircraft. And we had 2 types of fighters behind us. One was the F4, which was the most common type of fighter. Then we had 104s, but they would be paired. We'd have two F4s and two 104s. And then we were orbiting at around 25,000 feet or so. Our missions were assigned to us by South Vietnam, Tan Son Nhut, our base. That's where the headquarters where the Air Force was. And all our missions told us on a fragger, which was a telegram that says, okay, on such and such a day and such a location, you're going to support a fighter strike on a railroad yard in some town in North Vietnam. This will be done at such and such a time. These will be your support aircraft. Then they would list air-sea rescue frequencies. And they would consolidate all the intelligence information in that area and try to tell us, what to expect. As far as our personal feelings about it, you found that certain areas of North Vietnam were not as hostile or not as threatening as others. And so you sort of evaluate these things a little bit, and some of the ones that you consider to be more difficult, not more difficult in the sense that it's going to take any more skill to fly it. It's just more that the enemy is more concentrated the further you go inland. And they have more guns and more missile sites and more airplanes and fighters that could come after you. So, yeah, you think about it and you say, gee, that's going to be a dicey one, or maybe. But what happens is, when you come down to briefing and you sit in the briefing and you go out and you pre-flight your airplane and you take off, that all vanishes from your mind, and all you think about is doing your job. There's a difference. I mean, up until the point where you actually committed to doing something like pre-flighting the airplane or attending the briefing, that takes away the worry or the anxiety completely, and you're home free.
Flaps, 20 degrees, fuel selectors, on mains, lowers, unload, cross speed, up, propellers, forward takeoff, carb heat, roll, hold, trim tabs, set, controls, free, mixture, switch, cowl flaps, take off, let it roll. B1, B2,
Today's attack will be on a supply depot. We're hoping that destroy the enemy's supplies in this particular depot, but other targets that we've used in the past have been bridges, highways, railroad yards, and railroad bridges. Anything that would intercept or interfere with the easy movement of supplies. We'll be in North Vietnam for about 45 minutes to an hour. Then we'll come back, and the mission will take probably about 3 to 4 hours to complete. Well, today there's 6 people on this airplane, and sometimes there's 7. What we start with is the pilot, who I am, sits in front, and directly behind him are 2 seats, one for a navigator and the other for a gunner. But the guns have been removed from this airplane, so it's a free seat. Behind me is a compartment for the EWOs, and there's 4 EWOs in the airplane. They're sitting in the back of the airplane under the wing, and their job is to determine the radar frequencies that are operating. We're interested in where they are located, and also in jamming them, and also giving warning to the fighter pilots whenever a missile site is locked onto them or tracking them or has launched a missile against them. So that's our job. All right, we're over North Vietnam now. We've established an orbit that puts our two airplanes in optimum position to provide maximum jamming and ECM support. We're tuned into the enemy missile sites in AAA, and anytime that the missile sites are locked onto either us or to a fighter, we can tell the sound the radar makes when it locks onto an aircraft, and when they launch, it makes a different sound. And when the missile is homing in on you, it makes a different sound. And so we know that, and then we can tell the fighter pilots. And a missile coming up leaves a trail, smoke trail, but they're very fast and they maneuver with you. The airplane is a little bit more maneuverable than the missile, and so if you time it just right, you can move out of the way while their radius of turn is greater than yours. What I'm going to do is make a 180-degree turn, and while I make my 180-degree turn, my jammers aren't optimized to jam the enemy radars. That's why the airplane behind me maintains level flight, and his jammers will cover the area where I lose my effective jamming. While I'm in this turn now, my jammers are some of them are effective, but some of them are ineffective because they're pointing way out the side of the airplane, not pointed at the ground or at the missile sites and radar sites that we are primarily concerned with. Now I roll out, and now I'm back on course, and my jammers are good. And the other airplane, he can wait till it's appropriate in our racetrack pattern for him to make his turn.
16 750-pound bombs for each airplane.
We've accomplished our mission, and the fighters are broken off the target, and they're headed out of the target area. We still cover them with jamming until they get out of the immediate threat area. They're heading for a tanker to refuel before they go home because they don't have enough fuel to make it all the way home. And we won't either because we had to stay up here a little bit longer than normal. And so when we come off the target, we know where the in-flight refueling tankers are going to be located, so we head for that area. And then we contact the tankers and we join up and we refuel, and then we can make it all the way home to our base at Takhli, Thailand. We're flying now, and we're 1,700 feet or 1,600 feet, and we're approaching the runway from the south about 11 o'clock, and I'm moving over here to the right. I'm going to set my power here. We're doing about 500 feet per minute descent. Hopefully we'll make it this time. We touched down too hard, but we made it.
You did it!
We got it on the runway.
We made it!
Yeah.
Don't sink.
Finally! Congratulations on your landing.
All right. So, my closet where I keep some of my old flight gear. I'll show you some of what I have left. This is a flight suit that I wore typically all the time that I flew, and it has my name on it, a parachute jump, my command wings, and my rank up here is Lieutenant Colonel. A heavier flight suit. This is a winter flight suit that's insulated. It's heavier, and I'd only wear this in the winter time. It's supposed to be survival gear if you jump out of an airplane. It'll protect you against the cold weather for a little bit. These are my fatigue uniform. This is what I typically wore day to day. It wasn't my normal uniform that I'd wear when I was instructing or anything like that, but it was a fatigue uniform. This is my mess dress jacket. You can see they have the miniature medals here. The left one here with an Oakley cluster is the air medal that I was awarded when I was flying in Thailand, flying the B-66. All these others are campaign medals and good behavior medal and all that kind of stuff. And that is the extent of my saved uniform. Life on Takhli Air Base was reasonable. We were living in hooches, which are open bay, single-story barracks, and they were cut up in little cubicles, but it was mostly open bay, and people would, scrounge stuff and make a cubicle out of it, and so I had a little corner and the thing. And later on, when we were flying night missions, they brought in trailers, and so there were two-man trailers with a bathroom in between, and so I was assigned to one of those with Smiley. We shared a trailer. The purpose of the trailer was to keep the light out, and also it was insulated more, and so we had air conditioning and so forth like that the open bay barracks didn't have. We had an officers club where we in a mess hall that we ate, and typically it was American food all the time with maybe local fruit and so forth like that, but it was typical American fare. We'd get together and go to the bar and play drinking games and sing drinking songs and have fun like that.
Parties make the world go round, world go round, world go round. Parties make the world go round. Let's have a party.
You got to be careful because you can't drink too much and expect to go fly. So you have to be careful about that. When we were time off, we would often go into the village nearby. We would go by motorcycle. We would ride on the back of a motorcycle behind the Thai driver, and we'd hang on to his waist, and we'd go into town, and we'd have. My favorite food was the Thai shrimp fried rice. Yeah, I thought Thailand was an interesting country to be visiting, and later on I visited down when I was on rest and recuperation weekend. We went down to Pattaya Beach where we water skied and snorkeled and sunbathed and so forth like that. It was, Thailand is a very attractive place to be. I returned back to the States in September of 1966, that was after I flew 81 missions. When I arrived back in the United States, they dropped me off at McClellan Air Force Base in California. Then I flew commercial to New York, and then took either a train or a bus to Connecticut to pick up my family. And after picking up the family, we drove up to Vermont to be with the family for a few days before we eventually moved to Arizona. So we drove back down to Arizona. That would have been in late September of '66. It was the last thing in my mind that I'd ever become a physiological training officer, but I guess it was a blessing in disguise, because Arizona is a beautiful place to be stationed at Williams Air Force Base, and my kids loved it there because our house was right on the edge of the desert, and it was the biggest playground in the world for them. And also, while I was assigned there as a physiological training officer, I became very active in the Boy Scout movement, and I became an advisor to the Scoutmaster committee chairman, and I was involved in a lot of training for Boy Scouts. The B-66 mission was always rewarding every time it flew, because what we were doing was supporting the strike force as best we could. So for us in the B-66, it was always the same. It was a worthwhile mission. We were proud to do it, and so forth. Now, the fighters, every time they went up in the North Vietnam, they were exposed to anti-aircraft fire, missile fire, and enemy aircraft. And so a lot of times they were sent up to North Vietnam to bomb a small target. When you're exposing a valuable airplane and a valuable pilot with a limited number of bombs compared to what they could carry. So, I mean, if you could put a 105 up there with all the bombs it could carry or all the weapons it could carry and hit a vital target, then it might be worthwhile, or the opportunity of return for your effort is much greater. But if you go up there with a limited amount of bombs, but you're still exposing the pilot and the aircraft to all that anti-aircraft fire and missile fire and things like that, it greatly reduces the effectiveness of the weapon, or the 105, or the pilot who's doing it. So the risk-reward was not proportional as to what it could have been. For me, the Air Force was a wonderful experience. I met many wonderful people. I had many friendships with people all the way from, I bonded with people from pilot training all the way to the end when my last Air Force assignment. It was an opportunity. I've lived in Vermont, I've lived in Arizona, I've lived in England, I've lived in France, I've lived in Korea, and I've lived in Thailand, and all the places in between I've traveled. So it's been a wonderful experience for me. I recommend it for anybody. It's not for everybody, but for me it was great.
Come on and join the Air Force, we're a happy band, they say. We never do a lick of work, just fly around all day. While others work and study hard and soon grow old and blind, you'll take to the air without a care, and you will never mind. You'll never mind, you'll never mind. Oh, come and join the Air Force and you will never mind. Promotions come upon you just as high as you desire. You're riding on the gravy train when you're an Air Force flyer. But just when you're about to be a general, you'll find the engine coughs, the wings fall off, and you will never mind. You'll never mind, you'll never mind. Oh, come and join the Air Force and you will never mind. One day you loop and spinner, and with an awful tear, you find yourself without your wings, but you will never care. For in about 2 minutes more another pair you'll find. You'll fly with Pete and his angel suite and you will never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. Oh, come and join the Air Force and you will never mind. You're flying across the ocean when you hear your engine spit. You see your prop come to a stop, the goddamn engine's quit. The ship won't float, you cannot swim, the shore is miles behind. You'll be a dish for happy fish, but you will never mind. You'll never mind, you'll never mind. Oh, come and join the Air Force and you will never mind.